Hi there, Linda Behrens here again. I've been doing a fair amount of thinking about language and how hard it is to change language habits. And some time ago, I wrote a blog about, I'll read it, out of a box typing and into personal agility. And I just have been thinking a little bit more about this as I'm encountering people who have been using type for a long time and they have a certain language that they speak. And in our experiences, we found that this language or these language habits have a tendency to be limiting of people sometimes. And while having a name for something can be liberating because you can say, this is who I am. When we use certain ways of talking about that, we wind up sending a message of, well, that's what you are. And who I am is a very different question than what I am. So the challenge here is that we have a history, many years of history, of approaching type from the Myers-Briggs language of extroversion, introversion, thinking, feeling, sensing and intuiting. Now I've already changed those habits because it was sensation and intuition, or sensing and intuition. And then it was thinking and feeling and judging and perceiving. So what we early on, many years ago, decided that we at Inner Strength, and what came before Inner Strength, in our trainings and our practice, we wanted to get people to talk about, I have a preference for sensing, or I have a preference for intuiting. And we changed those nouns like sensation and intuition to gerunds. And a gerund is a noun form of a verb, if you will. No, it makes it an adjective. Oh my gosh, I've forgotten all of that from a long time ago. But anyway, so we changed it to sensing and intuiting so that it gave the idea of a verb, of an activity that you engage in. And that's what those are. Those are activities. You're not a sensor. You're not a thinker. You're not a feeler. You're really not even an introvert or an extrovert. So basically we tried to get people and ourselves to kind of break those language habits of saying sensor, intuitor, thinker, feeler, and to really use them with INGs. So I have a preference for sensing, or I notice that when I'm engaging in introverted sensing, I tend to give a whole lot of history of something. So that we start to realize that we have all of these processes available to us to use. And the one-sidedness that Jung talked about with the 8 types that he described is when one of those processes is one-sided and overbearing. And, if that's all you do, that would be one thing, but it isn't all we do. We engage in these processes in many ways, and sometimes they're highly sophisticated, polished ways, and sometimes they're rather childish, immature, and destructive ways. And then there's a whole range in between of using those processes. So let me back up a little bit, because that was my history piece. Several years ago, another history piece, many years ago actually, I came across a great thinker named Fritjof Capra, C-A-P-R-A, Fritjof, R-I-T-J-O-F. And his book was turned into a movie called Mind Walk. You can see it on YouTube. I recommend it. Basically, what I learned from Fritjof, who's an interdisciplinary thinker with a physics background, is that living systems, to understand a living system, you have to look at the pattern. Now, patterns are what stay the same over time. He said, and also you need to look at the processes. So processes are activities that can change at times, and they're engaged to preserve the pattern. These are characteristics of all living systems. So, and another piece is that they're patterns, processes, and structure. So the structure is the embodiment of the pattern. So when we look at the Jungian model, for example, or the Jungian model of psychological type, the pattern is that configuration of relationships with which process you're leading with, which process you're supporting with, dominant, auxiliary, whatever language you want to use. That's that configuration. It's a configuration, which is really not adding up the parts. It's the whole. It is an attempt to look at the whole holistically at the pattern. And what Dario Nardi and I discovered when we were working with these descriptions is that we could come up with some names for the themes. So there is such a thing as a whole type theme. Now, I can't remember all the names. 16 are a lot to remember. And even though I developed them, I just never set them to memory. But I'll tell you mine. My theme is designer theorizer. So, I tend to see myself as a designer. I design all kinds of programs, presentations, instructional design things. And when I was younger, I sewed, I designed some clothes. Okay. And that I'm a theorizer. So people see the theorizing that happens, but they don't necessarily see the designing that goes on. One of our colleagues is designing a highly sophisticated multi-level training program looking at the body, emotions, personality type characteristics, and neuroscience, all of those things, all into a program. So she's designing that, and she has the same pattern I have, designer theorizer. So, so there's this theme. And when we talk about, okay, so in the Jungian model, sometimes people would say that I'm a thinker. So, and actually some people would say I'm an introverted thinking type, meaning that I lead with introverted thinking. But that's only a piece. That misses the whole rest of it, and it misses the pattern. So when we're looking at type from a typology, Myers-Briggs perspective, we have to leave behind reference to the parts. And by the way, there is nothing, if you see a blog on our website, interstrength.org, about J and P, it means nothing in and of itself. It only points to what you use in the external world. It was a way of encoding, creating a type code that would represent the configuration of the pattern of use, preferred pattern of use of these different processes. So patterns stay the same. Processes, we change. They change over time. They're activities that you engage in. Okay. So that's the traditional Jungian-based type language. So along comes Kersey, David Kersey, and he's been researching temperament for a long time. And so he did name them at one point. We refer to them as SPs or SJs or NTs or NFs. And that, if you know the code, that has a meaning for you for a certain pattern. Then he named the temperaments. I believe they were things like rational. I get all my names mixed up. So mine was rational, but we changed that name to theorist. There was we used four names that are names for the pattern. So where I have patience for this and try not to get too much on a soapbox, it's a pattern. So it's the name of a pattern. And by naming the pattern, if you know the pattern, you get a lot of information. So if we want to talk about theorist, or you want to talk about stabilizer, the theorist, we know they have a core psychological need for competence and knowledge, and that they have a talent for strategy. and strategic thinking. Okay, not that others don't do that, but this is the particular talent. Whereas stabilizer, those with that pattern have a core need for continuity and belonging and having the world go on. And they have a talent for logistics, and logistics are putting everything in place to make things happen, and that creates stability. That's the name. And then we had catalyst, which we found better than idealist, was David Kersey's word. And the catalyst is really all about catalyzing growth and the development of human potential in people. And so we have that with the core need of meaning and purpose and a sense of identity, with the talent for diplomacy. And then we have the improviser, which we call improviser. David Kersey called that artisan. Well, the problem was artisan and idealist both had some biases. If you mentioned it, who needs to be idealistic? We need to get real work done. And artisan, well, those are the craftspeople. And so we decided that they're the bricklayers. But so those with doctorates and academics and scientists and many other people with that pattern didn't resonate with that name. So we found that improviser was better, because it's a matter of having this gift of tactical intelligence to meet their needs, of responding to the needs of the moment, and the talent is for tactics and in the moment being improvising the solution to whatever needs to go on. Okay, so I guess the thing is that I have a tendency to be okay with saying I'm a theorist, although I'm working on my language to say I have a theorist pattern, just to kind of highlight the idea of pattern. But I have trouble saying that anything about the parts, that I'm a pragmatist. Well, that kind of makes sense. Or that I'm what is it? That I'm an abstract person, or somebody is a concrete person. So those are the processes, the dynamics that maintain the pattern, the kind of language that a theorist tends to use, or that that in the essential motivators, it's the language that each pattern prefers, and two kinds of language, concrete versus, or abstract, kind of referencing concepts and referencing tangible things. And then the kinds of roles they like to take, which are being either affiliative and checking in with others in the group and the rules, or being pragmatic in the sense of being autonomous and acting on what they see needs to happen. So those are dynamics that different patterns share, but we don't use them as nouns. In interaction styles, we have names like get things going, behind the scenes. So those are the names of the patterns. They kind of give you a sense of what that pattern's about. And we have some dynamics, people who prefer communicating with directive language, directing actions, or informing language. So we don't really like to be called informers, and some people get affronted if you call them directors. So we don't change those things away from ing words, the gerunds, into nouns. The biggest challenge comes with shifting our language, because we are so, as old timers, are used to talking about, I'm an INTP. But when I say I'm an INTP, that doesn't mean I plus N plus T plus P to me. That means this whole pattern of designer theorizer. So the habits are hard. And I try to be patient with our students and those people learning the methodology. I try not to bristle too much when I see people making it a noun. So it's really the idea of I have preferences for INTP, that's okay in my book. It's just not I am an INTP. I'm not a thinker. I prefer introverted thinking. That's my preferred and leading role process. I'm not an intuitor, and I'm not a perceiver. Okay, so all of that has meaning in the context of the code, but when you say that's what I am, you've defined me and limited me. And when you say that to someone else, you define them and limit them. So switching nouns to gerunds, unless you're really clear on it being a pattern and that you're describing a pattern. And so sometimes if you're in doubt, so I have a behind the scenes pattern. You could say I have a preference for behind the scenes, but that seems to imply something else. And behind the scenes is my interaction style. So I thank you for this opportunity for me to get on one of my little soapboxes about language, and just to know that I know how hard it is to change your language and to shift. And in so many places, it's written in the old-fashioned way. And I call that old-fashioned because it was about being a thinker, a feeler, a sensor, intuitor. No, you're not. That defines you in a very narrow way to say those things. Introversion and introversion, well, yeah, sort of. I don't bristle so much about that if I'm an introvert. It seems to mean something. Judger, perceiver, no, that doesn't mean that. Because I have INTP on the end of my code that would say I'm a perceiver, but actually my dominant process is a judging one, introverted thinking. And, judger means you're judgmental, and I don't know what perceiver means in terms of a label. So my 2 cents worth around language and how hard it is to change our language. And I hope you've gotten the idea of how important it is to change our language. So thanks for listening. Until next time.